Tonight, we don't need to move quickly. We are not here to arrive. We are here to wander, slowly, carefully, across the dim corridors of forgotten time, barefoot, quiet, and unafraid. You don't need to listen closely. You don't need to try. Just let your thoughts fall like soft petals. Let your breath become quiet, and let the hush of history wrap around your mind like a warm blanket left by someone who loved you long ago. Because tonight, we follow a soldier, a man without a name, a man who once stood among thousands, and then stood alone, not because he was chosen, but because something in him kept moving. Long after the guns fell silent, he walked past the crumbling bridges of forgotten borders, through fields that had once been filled with marching. Now, only wind, only wheat, only shadows bending gently in the moonlight. His shoulders sagged not from exhaustion, but memory. And he didn't look for roads. He followed trees, clouds, chimney smoke in the distance. He followed birds. He followed silence. And maybe, in that silence, something sacred still lingers. Sometimes the wind would bring voices, not loud, not clear, just fragments. A laugh, a lullaby, the clinking of a cup, the way someone once said his name, not as a command, but a comfort. But no one called him now. No one waited at a window. No one stirred the fire for his return. He knew this, and still he walked. His boots were softened by years and by water. Their laces had frayed, and yet they held. Just like him, he would stop now and then, kneel by a stream, wash his face in its silver cup, water in his palms, not to drink, but to feel. To remember what gentle felt like, because war had made him forget. There was a tree along his path, once old, bent, beautiful, its bark scarred by storms, its branches like open arms. He leaned against it, and for the first time in many nights he slept not with one eye open, but both eyes closed, and the tree, that quiet witness of years, held him with shadow and leaf and silence. And not all history is meant to be remembered. Some is meant to be felt. There were places where the war had not left ruins, but whispers. A cracked window in an abandoned chapel, a wheelbarrow filled with rain, a child's ribbon caught in a fence. He would notice these things always. He never rushed. He knew that the world forgets what it doesn't slow down to see. And so he moved like a monk in the cathedral of after. His steps were prayers, his breath incense. There was once a night of fog so thick he could not see the stars, only the shape of his own hands, and so he held them up to the sky, just to feel the weight of his body still here, still alive. And somewhere, far away, he imagined someone lighting a candle for him, not because they knew him, but because they too could not sleep. And maybe, in that forgotten silence, something sacred still lingers. One night, he found an old bench near a railway that hadn't seen a train in years. The metal was rusted, the wood splintered, but he sat, and he listened to the stillness. Sometimes he would write things on paper he could no longer send. Letters to no one. Letters to everyone. Words like, I'm sorry, I remember, I'm tired, I hope. Then he'd fold the page, press it to his lips, and tuck it into a tree hollow or beneath a stone, not to be found, but to be placed, like a flower on a grave, like a whisper to the sky. And maybe the earth kept them. Maybe the wind still reads them aloud, when no one's listening. He never stayed in one place too long, not because he feared danger, but because he feared the ache of stillness. To sit too long was to feel what had been lost. To walk, that was his way of remembering without breaking. There were animals who crossed his path. A fox, once red and clever, they shared an apple he had found, and when the fox left, it looked back once, as if to say, I see you, I won't follow, but I see you. Other times, the birds would follow him, not flocks, just one or two, like little angels in disguise. He would hum to them, low, soft notes, and they would hum back, in the rustle of feathers. In one village, long since abandoned, he found a doorway, still standing. Just the doorway. No house, no roof, just a frame, open to the field. He stood inside it just for a moment, and imagined what it felt like to return, to step through a door and hear your name in the arms of someone you love. But the door was empty, and still, he smiled, because in that moment, memory was enough, and not all stories end. Some just grow quieter. His path took him along rivers that glowed with moonlight. He didn't try to cross them, not yet. He would sit by them, let the sound of the water brush his heart like a lullaby from before time. He would take off his boots, let his feet feel the soil, wiggle his toes like a boy who had never seen war. Sometimes, he would cry, not loud, not sharp, just the kind of crying that slips out in silence, like steam from a cup. Tears for no one and everyone. Tears for mothers, for brothers, for girls who waited by windows and grew old waiting. Tears that did not need To be explained. And when he was done, he would lie back on the earth, let the stars fall over him like snow, and he would sleep, because even the forgotten deserve to rest, and maybe, in that sleep, something sacred still lingers. And so he walked, step after step, through fields that no longer spoke the names of battles, but instead whispered with tall grass brushing against his legs, like a mother's hand once did, back when the world was innocent and filled with lullabies. Instead of orders, past wells where children once laughed and drew water in wooden buckets, now long decayed, past orchards where apples still hung heavy though no one came to harvest them, their sweetness left for the birds and the bees and the slow aching hum of time. And with every passing day the lines on his face deepened, not in sorrow but in softness, as if the wind itself carved them gently like a sculptor working in silence. For silence had become his only true companion, a silence so vast it felt like the sea, lapping at the edges of his mind, calling him not to drown but to float, to surrender, to be carried, not back, not forward, but inward, deeper into the folds of a world that had forgotten the taste of his name, a name once shouted in trenches, once scrawled onto dog tags, once written on envelopes soaked in perfume and prayer, now dissolved into the air like fog. At dawn, and as he passed another tree, another stone, another house where no one waited, he began to feel less like a man and more like a shadow that the earth had chosen to carry, a gentle reminder of everything that could be lost and still loved. And with each soft footfall, with each breath drawn like thread through a needle, he stitched the past and present together into a quilt of memories left unspoken, of fires that had long burned out but still left warmth in the ashes, of hands once held and voices once heard across candlelit rooms where the windows fogged with winter and longing. And through it all he never rushed, never asked where he was going or why, for going itself had become the purpose, and the purpose had become peace, a peace not loud or triumphant, but tender, a peace that whispered through the trees, through the ruins, through the broken bells that sometimes rang in his dreams when the night was quiet enough. And though no one saw him, not really, not truly, the animals still paused in his presence. The clouds still parted for the sun to find his shoulder, and sometimes, just sometimes, he imagined that the earth itself remembered him, not for what he had done, but for how he walked, so slowly, so softly, like someone who understood that every leaf held a secret, every breath was borrowed, and every story, even the forgotten ones, still mattered, still breathed, still waited to be held gently in the folds of sleep and love and velvet dark remembering. And maybe, in that unending motion, something sacred still lingers. And so he kept walking, through villages swallowed by ivy and time, where shutters hung crooked like tired eyelids, and doorways yawned open to nothing but dust and echo, where the air carried the scent of old wood and memories too fragile to name. And sometimes he would pause at a well, not to draw water, but to peer into it as though the dark circle might show him something, a reflection of the boy he once was, or perhaps the last woman who said his name with hope instead of worry. And when it showed him nothing but sky, he smiled gently, as if even emptiness had become a kind companion, and he would walk again, his coat brushing his knees, heavy not with weight, but with years, with stories sewn into its threads like forgotten hymns, with buttons that no longer matched but still held, with stitches made by a hand long gone, perhaps his mother's, perhaps his own. And sometimes he passed by things that should have mattered, flags, monuments, dates, carved into stone, but they did not speak to him the way a broken chair in a field did, or the way a window lit with a single candle did, or the way two birds in flight could mirror his own heart, trying to remember how to rise. And on he went, across bridges crumbling into brooks that babbled secrets to no one in particular, bridges built by men who never imagined the quiet that would someday walk across them, not in triumph, but in tenderness. And under his feet, the ground changed, sometimes soft with moss, sometimes hard with gravel, sometimes so muddy it sucked at his soles like memory pulling at the corners of sleep. But always, he moved forward, not with haste, but with reverence, as though each step was a kiss pressed into the fabric of the world, a soft insistence that he was still here, still real, still part of something, even if no one remembered the pages where his name had once been written. And as days faded into nights and nights into mornings that arrived not with trumpet calls, but with the hush of dew, settling onto spiderwebs and fence posts, he grew quieter, more rooted in the silence that now seemed to hold him like an old friend. And in that silence, he could hear things most people missed, the shift of clouds, the sigh of trees, the way dirt settles after being walked on by someone gentle. And though the world had stopped writing about him, had stopped carving medals or sending letters or even remembering which side he fought on. He found his reward in moments the world had no use for, the way a single daisy pushed through cracked stone, the way an old barn creaked in its sleep, the way his breath came in soft rhythms like waves too tired to crash. And once, in the far distance, he saw smoke rising not from battle, not from ruin, but from a chimney, a sign of life, and though his legs ached and his boots whispered that he might rest here, just once, he kept walking, not toward the smoke but around it, because the need to be seen had faded, and all that remained was the need to keep going, to keep listening to the soft rhythm of the land beneath him. And he remembered, once long ago, or maybe only yesterday, a moment when he had been wounded, when the sky above him had shattered with sound, and yet what stayed with him wasn't the pain or the blood or even the fear, but the warmth of a hand that had held his not tightly, not desperately, just enough to say, "You're not alone," and in that memory, he found rest even now. Even as the sun dipped behind hills he did not know the names of, and the stars returned, one by one, not as navigation, but as witnesses, soft and flickering, silent and sure, and when he lay down beneath them, his head resting on his arm, he did not sleep as a soldier, but as something older, a ghost perhaps, or a poem, or the echo of something once strong and now gentle, and the wind that passed over him did not chill him, for he had long ago made peace with cold, and it had made peace with him, and there, in the middle of a field no one claimed, beneath a sky that had outlived empires, he became still, not because the journey had ended, but because stillness, too, was a kind of movement, a kind of trust, a way of saying to the night, "You may hold me now," and the night did, soft as wool, deep as a forgotten lullaby, and in that deep cradle of dark, his breathing became the rhythm of the earth itself, slow, steady, sacred, and perhaps, somewhere far away, a child turned in her sleep, sensing without knowing that someone was remembering her without name, without reason, just out of love, and perhaps, an old woman looked up from her knitting, sensing the echo of someone who had once sat beside her fire and said nothing but had meant everything, and perhaps, a tree in a ruined courtyard shivered, feeling the step of a soul that had once leaned against its bark and wept without shame, and the world turned gently on, cradling its quiet walkers, its forgotten dreamers, its wounded poets, of the long road, and he, the soldier who no longer needed a name, moved on, softer than shadow, stronger than silence, becoming, at last, not a man, not a myth, but a memory that walked, a breath that lingered, a candle that refused to go out, and maybe, just maybe, somewhere along the road, not marked by signs or glory, he began to hum, not with voice, but with presence, and the stones beneath his feet remembered the song even if no one else could, and the hills, too, remembered, and the rivers, and the stars, and the distant wolves who paused in their night calls to listen, because in that hum was something older than sorrow and deeper than rest, the sound of someone coming home, not to a place, but to himself. And still, he walks past fences tangled in rose vines, past barns with sleeping owls in their rafters, past graveyards where names have been worn away by time and tears, and with every step, the world softens a little more, the wind grows slower, the night warmer, and the quiet deeper, and on he goes, not to reach an end, but to become the path itself, to merge with the journey, until there is no soldier, no war, no wound, only the echo of footsteps that no longer press into earth but float just above it, like breath, like prayer, like the last line of a story whispered by a voice made of velvet and time. And maybe, just maybe, even now, he passes near you, just beyond the edge of dream. And maybe the stillness you feel as you begin to drift is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something sacred walking past, steady, slow, tender, reminding your soul that even in the forgotten corners of history, someone walked home, not to be remembered, but to remember. And so he kept walking, through villages swallowed by ivy and time, where shutters hung crooked like tired eyelids and doorways yawned open to nothing but dust and echo, where the air carried the scent of old wood and memories too fragile to name. And sometimes he would pause at a well, not to draw water, but to peer into it as though the dark circle might show him something, a reflection of the boy he once was, or perhaps the last woman who said his name with hope instead of worry, and when it showed him nothing but sky, he smiled gently, as if even emptiness had become a kind companion, and he would walk again, his coat brushing his knees, heavy not with weight but with years, with stories sewn into its threads like forgotten hymns, with buttons that no longer matched, but still held, with stitches made by a hand long gone, perhaps his mother's, perhaps his own, and sometimes he passed by things that should have mattered. Flags, monuments, dates carved into stone, but they did not speak to him the way a broken chair in a field did, or the way a window lit with a single candle did, or the way two birds in flight could mirror his own heart trying to remember how to rise. And on he went, across bridges crumbling into brooks that babbled secrets to no one in particular, bridges built by men who never imagined the quiet that would someday walk across them, not in triumph, but in tenderness. And under his feet, the ground changed, sometimes soft with moss, sometimes hard with gravel, sometimes so muddy it sucked at his soles like memory pulling at the corners of sleep. But always he moved forward, not with haste, but with reverence, as though each step was a kiss pressed into the fabric of the world, a soft insistence that he was still here, still real, still part of something, even if no one remembered the pages where his name had once been written. And as days faded into nights and nights into mornings that arrived not with trumpet calls but with the hush of dew, settling onto spiderwebs and fence posts, he grew quieter, more rooted in the silence that now seemed to hold him like an old friend. And in that silence he could hear things most people missed, the shift of clouds, the sigh of trees, the way dirt settles after being walked on by someone gentle. And though the world had stopped writing about him, had stopped carving medals or sending letters or even remembering which side he fought on, he found his reward in moments the world had no use for, the way a single daisy pushed through cracked stone, the way an old barn creaked in its sleep, the way his breath came in soft rhythms like waves too tired to crash. And once, in the far distance, he saw smoke rising, not from battle, not from ruin, but from a chimney, a sign of life. And though his legs ached and his boots whispered that he might rest here, just once, he kept walking, not toward the smoke but around it, because the need to be seen had faded, and all that remained was the need to keep going, to keep listening to the soft rhythm of the land beneath him. And he remembered, once long ago, or maybe only yesterday, a moment when he had been wounded, when the sky above him had shattered with sound, and yet what stayed with him wasn't the pain or the blood or even the fear, but the warmth of a hand that had held his not tightly, not desperately, just enough to say, "You're not alone." And in that memory, he found rest even now. Even as the sun dipped behind hills he did not know the names of, and the stars returned, one by one, not as navigation, but as witnesses, soft and flickering, silent and sure. And when he lay down beneath them, his head resting on his arm, he did not sleep as a soldier, but as something older, a ghost perhaps, or a poem, or the echo of something once strong and now gentle. And the wind that passed over him did not chill him, for he had long ago made peace with cold, and it had made peace with him. And there, in the middle of a field no one claimed, beneath a sky that had outlived empires, he became still, not because the journey had ended, but because stillness, too, was a kind of movement, a kind of trust, a way of saying to the night, "You may hold me now." And the night did, soft as wool, deep as a forgotten lullaby. And in that deep cradle of dark, his breathing became the rhythm of the earth itself, slow, steady, sacred. And perhaps, somewhere far away, a child turned in her sleep, sensing without knowing that someone was remembering her without name, without reason, just out of love. And perhaps, an old woman looked up from her knitting, sensing the echo of someone who had once sat beside her fire and said nothing but had meant everything. And perhaps, a tree in a ruined courtyard shivered, feeling the step of a soul that had once leaned against its bark and wept without shame. And the world turned gently on, cradling its quiet walkers, its forgotten dreamers, its wounded poets, of the long road. And he, the soldier who no longer needed a name, moved on, softer than shadow, stronger than silence, becoming, at last, not a man, not a myth, but a memory that walked, a breath that lingered, a candle that refused to go out. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere along the road, not marked by signs or glory, he began to hum, not with voice, but with presence. And the stones beneath his feet remembered the song even if no one else could. And the hills, too, remembered, and the rivers, and the stars, and the distant wolves who paused in their night calls to listen, because in that hum was something older than sorrow and deeper than rest, the sound of someone coming home, not to a place, but to himself. And still, he walks, past fences tangled in rose vines, past barns with sleeping owls in their rafters, past graveyards where names have been worn away by time and tears. And with every step, the world softens a little more, the wind grows slower, the night warmer, and the quiet deeper. And on he goes, not to reach an end, but to become the path itself, to merge with the journey. until there is no soldier, no war, no wound, only the echo of footsteps that no longer press into earth but float just above it, like breath, like prayer, like the last line of a story whispered by a voice made of velvet and time. And maybe, just maybe, even now, he passes near you, just beyond the edge of dream. And maybe the stillness you feel as you begin to drift is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something sacred walking past, steady, slow, tender, reminding your soul that even in the forgotten corners of history, someone walked home, not to be remembered, but to remember. And so, he kept walking not out of duty, nor from longing, but because the earth beneath his feet felt like a memory that hadn't yet been spoken. His boots were worn smooth from years of silence, and the soles no longer echoed with the hardness of war, but with the hush of moss, the patience of gravel paths, the quiet surrender of fallen leaves. Some evenings the moon followed him like an old friend who didn't ask questions, and other nights the clouds veiled even that pale gaze, leaving him alone with nothing but the soft rasp of his own breathing and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures who, too, knew how to move without being noticed. He passed through orchards where no one harvested anymore, trees heavy with forgotten sweetness, apples that fell with a soft sigh and sank into the soil, as if feeding the very roots that had once fed soldiers. He paused, once, beside an old schoolhouse, long collapsed into itself, its bell rusted and still, and for a moment he thought he could hear the echo of laughter, tiny voices calling out answers to questions no one asked anymore. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes warmed, like a flicker of candlelight trying to remember how to dance. There were times when the weather shifted without warning, a sudden mist curling around his knees like memory trying to cling, or a wind so soft it felt like a child brushing past in sleep. He did not resist these changes. He welcomed them, for each shift in air or scent or texture reminded him that time had not ended, only softened. In one village, nearly devoured by ivy and thyme, he passed under an archway with no name, where a door swung slightly in the breeze, creaking not like protest, but like greeting. He stepped inside and stood in the hush dust, dancing like whispers in sunlight that filtered through broken panes. The scent of dry paper and old bread still lingering in the walls. A pair of shoes remained by the fireplace, as if their owner had only stepped out for a moment and might return. And on the mantel, a small mirror, cracked but whole enough to catch his reflection. He looked, not to confirm that he existed, but to witness the lines carved like rivers on his face, the snow of his hair, the soft hollowness of eyes that had seen too much to blink quickly. He nodded at his own ghost, then turned away, not because it hurt, but because it was time to go. And outside, the crows had returned silent, still, perching on broken fences like sentinels of forgotten things. They watched him without alarm, and he passed beneath them like a shadow too quiet to chase. Fields lay golden and dry, wheat bowed in reverence to wind and time, and he moved among them not like a man, but like a hymn. The sun dipped low, casting the world in amber, turning every ruin into a cathedral, every broken window into stained glass. He did not hurry. He walked as though each step was a question asked softly to the ground. Will you hold me? Will you remember? Will you forgive? And the earth, in its own language of stillness and seed, whispered yes, 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 and maybe, just. Over the hill, the wind shifted again, not colder, not warmer, just different, like the turning of a page in a book without end. And perhaps, somewhere far behind him, a candle was lit in a cottage that once waited for him, not knowing it still did. The story does not pause, it breathes. And so he walked, and the world listened. And as night leaned ever more gently into the land, casting long velvet shadows across stone walls and hollow roads, he stepped into that darkness as though it were a familiar room, a room without corners, lit not by flame but by memory. The stars had begun their slow emergence, each one blinking into existence with the shy curiosity of a child peeking around a doorway. He didn't name them though. Once, long ago, he might have. Their patterns had long since slipped from maps and minds, yet he recognized them, not in knowledge, but in feeling. They shimmered like thoughts that had waited too long to be spoken, and perhaps they, too, had been walking across endless sky, waiting for someone below to simply look up and remember they were there. He passed a tree bent nearly in half by years of wind, its trunk gnarled with survival, its branches reaching not upward, but outward, like a mother forever reaching for something already lost. Beneath its bowed shape, the ground was soft, and he paused there not to rest, but to listen. To what? He didn't know. Perhaps to the roots murmuring stories into the earth. Perhaps to the silence, which at this hour, had grown thick enough to feel sacred. He closed his eyes for just a moment and let his weight shift forward, into the hush, into the knowing that this, too, was part of the road, this pause, this stillness, this quiet nod to the tree and all it had seen. And then he moved on, his steps slow, his breath steady, as if the wind itself were borrowing its rhythm from his lungs. A stream whispered to his right, its voice threading through reeds and stones with the delicate insistence of time, and he followed it, not as a traveler seeking direction, but as one walking beside a lifelong friend. Sometimes the moon vanished behind cloud banks, and the world darkened to a shade deeper than black, yet he did not stumble. He had walked in darker places before. His feet knew how to speak to earth even when his eyes could not see it, and in those moments his mind wandered not in chaos, but in drifting, like the way a feather moves across still water, touching memory without sinking into it. He thought, briefly, of a song, not its lyrics, just its hum, a tune someone once sang as they cooked in the quiet warmth of a kitchen, where the scent of bread made the air heavy with love. He did not try to remember who it was. The song was enough. Eventually, the road led him into a thicket, where the trees closed in above, their bare arms interlaced like a cathedral roof of bone and bark. He stepped beneath it without fear, his hand brushing a low-hanging branch that trembled just slightly, not from his touch, but as if in recognition. The path narrowed, roots curled across the soil like veins. The air was thick with the breath of the forest, damp, ancient, full of leaf and time, and yet he moved through it not as an intruder but as one expected. A fox paused in the underbrush, its eyes two quiet flames in the dark. It did not run. It watched him pass, and then, like a whispered thought, disappeared into shadow. The forest accepted him not because it knew his name, but because he moved like someone who had forgotten how to disturb anything. Deeper into the woods he wandered, until even the stars above were gone, and all that remained was the soft sound of twigs beneath his steps, the occasional sigh of wind threading through the high limbs, and the gentle thrum of his own heart. He was not cold, not hungry, not tired. These things no longer defined him. What moved him now was something older, something deeper perhaps, the simple wish to keep remembering through motion, to keep honoring the road by touching every inch of it, one step at a time. And as he walked, he remembered hands. Not faces, just hands. Some had lifted him from the ground, some had offered water. One had held his, once, in a moment so full of silence it had nearly broken the world open. He did not cling to these memories. He simply let them pass through him like wind through long grass, soft, full, not meant to be held. The forest opened, again, not with fanfare, but gradually, as if even the trees respected the gentleness of his pace. Ahead, a field, empty, endless, lit by nothing but the trembling blue hush of night. He stepped into it slowly. The grass whispered around his ankles. The earth welcomed the weight of him. Somewhere far off, an owl called out, not in alarm, but in acknowledgement. He was seen, he was heard, even now, and in that moment, he did not need a destination. The walk itself was home. And maybe, just maybe, if you listen closely enough in your sleep tonight, you'll hear him passing nearby. A breath on the window pane, a creak in the floorboards. Not a ghost, not a stranger, just a memory with footsteps, still walking, still soft, still sacred. And somewhere in the distance, where the sky folds into the hills like a blanket tucked by unseen hands, a single lantern flickered in the window of an abandoned inn, its light neither bright nor pleading, but steady, as though it had waited every night since the war for someone just like him to pass beneath it. He did not pause, nor did he knock. He simply lifted his eyes for a moment, letting the golden glow rest gently in the well of his memory, like the last warm spoonful of something once sweet. The road beneath him curved, just slightly, as though it had learned the shape of his footsteps long ago and had begun to bend itself accordingly, carrying him not to a place, but to a feeling, a hush, a home carved into silence. The air was cool now, thick with the scent of damp stone and wild lavender, and every breath he drew seemed to soften the very world around him, slowing time, smoothing edges, inviting rest. He walked past a stone well, moss-laced and dry, its rope long vanished, but its presence still noble, as though it once gave drink to stories that now slept beneath the surface, and the birds, those invisible keepers of twilight, had gone still silent witnesses to the man whose passage stirred no alarm, only respect. His hands folded gently before him, carried no weapon, no bundle, no letter to deliver. Yet it seemed the earth still opened to him, as if he bore the weight of memory itself. Memory of fields long harvested, of laughter that once spilled across, doorways now silent, of feet that danced in wooden halls now devoured by ivy and years. In the hush of his steps, all these echoes stirred again, not loudly, but as murmurs, thin ribbons of sound that curled through the night air and vanished again like incense. Then came the bridge, old wooden, leaning slightly with time, but still standing. It arched over a brook whose song had not ceased in centuries, a lullaby composed for no audience but the moon and whatever wandered close enough to listen. He placed one foot upon it, then the next, and the wood did not creak, not out of strength, but reverence, as though even the bridge had waited for this footfall. This one slow crossing. Beneath him the water glistened faintly, and he looked down, not for reflection, but for rhythm. And there it was, the steady glide of water around stone, effortless, eternal, a sound that could carry even the heaviest heart into sleep. On the other side, a meadow opened before him like an unspoken promise. The grass swayed in gentle tides, moved by breezes that knew how to cradle rather than push. And from somewhere, perhaps far, perhaps within, came the faint smell of ash and cloves, like the scent left behind after someone has said goodbye in the kindest way possible. He breathed it in, and it wrapped around his ribs, softening even what he did not name. He remembered a lullaby then. Just the tune. Just a hum. Perhaps it had no words at all. Or perhaps the words had fallen away long ago, like petals from a flower once clutched too tightly. The tune held him, nonetheless, rocking him inside his own steps, turning each pace into a lull, each movement into a drift. He moved onward into the meadow, and though no one watched, it felt as if he were being observed by the stars, ancient lights stitched into the sky like holes poked through velvet to let the light out. He whispered something then, not words, just breath given shape by longing. The kind of whisper one makes when standing in a room filled with old photographs. A breath that says, "I remember," without needing to explain what. The path beneath him grew fainter, now not disappearing, but becoming so soft that it seemed to rise and fall with the beat of his own heart. And still he walked, for walking was now his only way of praying, and every step pressed gently against the sacred. Maybe, if you could see him then just for a second, you'd understand that he was no longer seeking. He was being carried not by legs, but by time itself, guided not by signs, but by the subtle pull of places that still remembered his name, even if he had forgotten it. Perhaps there is something beyond arrival, a kind of peace that does not live in doors or beds or letters received, a peace that lives only in motion, in the soft, rhythmic return of foot to earth again and again, like a lullaby sung to the road itself. And the night deepened, not darker, just more complete. A hush so full it wrapped the world like a shawl drawn tight around weary shoulders. And the soldier, though no one called him that anymore, kept walking, his breath slow, and even his eyes half closed, his steps steady as stars. And far behind him, the war, if it ever truly ended, faded like smoke in a dream, leaving only the footprints of someone who had loved and lost and walked and returned, not to where he began, but to a silence that finally welcomed him like an open door. And so, the path beneath his feet began to soften further, not with wear, but with memory, as if the soil itself had begun to recall the weight of weary boots, the quiet rhythm of a man who no longer hurried. Trees leaned gently toward him now, as if bowing not in reverence, but in recognition. Their branches, old and patient, whispered against each other, telling stories not in language, but in wind-swayed sighs. And in those sighs, there were hints of old voices. A mother calling her son home before the rain. A girl laughing behind a hay cart in the spring of a forgotten year. A grandfather humming while mending the same fence, again and again, as if routine could hold the world together. Above, the moon floated like a slow breath held by the heavens, not full, not new, just resting, as if it, too, was tired. And the stars, small and steady, kept their distance, but not coldly. They watched, the way an old friend watches another sleep, protective, quiet, not needing to be close to still care. The man did not look up often, he no longer needed to, for the sky lived inside him now, as did the road, and the bridge, and the meadow, and every breath he had ever taken when no one was there to hear it. He passed a crumbling stone marker half sunken into earth. Whatever words had once been carved into its surface had long been worn away by time and weather, leaving behind only the soft outline of remembrance. Perhaps it had once been a boundary, or a grave, or merely a place someone had stopped and stayed for a while. But now, it simply stood, as a witness to quiet footsteps and a world that moved on. Gently. Further ahead, the earth grew more still, as if holding its own breath. The trees parted to reveal a wide open field where the wind moved freely, brushing across the tall grass like fingertips tracing a sleeping body. He walked through it slowly, and the grass whispered round him not words, again, but feelings, safety, slowness, the kind of stillness that lives in the corners of old libraries or the folds of a well-loved quilt. He remembered then, without trying to, a night, long ago, when he'd stood on a hill just like this, watching the stars with someone who no longer had a name. They had said nothing, then, just stood. And somehow, that silence had been the most complete language of all. He did not miss them, not in the way most would think. It wasn't longing that ached in his chest. It was presence. The deep knowing that something once beautiful had happened, and would never happen again in the same way. But that it had happened, and that was enough. And maybe, in that moment, the wind turned just slightly, as if it, too, remembered, and the grass bent low not from the weight of his passing, but from the gravity of memory. Let us return to him, to the road, and to the hush that carried him, not with urgency, but with breath, with dusk, with the slow unraveling of everything loud. He walked as though time had thinned beneath his feet, and the present no longer held the sharpness it once did. Instead, it stretched wide and dim, like the inside of a cathedral after everyone has gone home, where only echoes and the scent of candle smoke remain. His boots made no sound now, not because the path had softened, but because he had become part of it. It was no longer walking on the earth, but within it, as if the stones and moss and old dust of forgotten roads had taken him in like a story once misplaced, and now gently remembered. The sky above him darkened slowly, not with fear, but with comfort, as though the stars had taken a long breath before beginning their quiet vigil. There was no wind here, only the hush of breath passing through branches, the deep lull of time folding back into itself. He passed ruins, then remains of a cottage, perhaps, or a smithy where someone once worked, not for riches, but for rhythm. The walls were broken, but they still stood, and the chimney rose like a spine that refused to forget how uprightness felt. He paused only slightly, his eyes moving over the crumbled stones, the ivy-draped hearth, the ghost of a window frame, through which no light had passed in centuries. Yet still it stood, and in standing, it remembered. The air held warmth there, strangely. Not physical warmth, but the kind that lingers after someone has laughed in a place, so deeply that even the silence keeps smiling long after they've gone. And as he moved beyond it, into the deeper folds of the woods, he did not shiver, for the night wrapped around him like an old coat, familiar, frayed, but faithful. The trees here were older, their trunks gnarled and heavy with years, and their leaves moved like paper pages turning in a book whose story no longer needed to be read aloud. He placed a hand briefly on one trunk, and in that moment, it felt not like bark, but like skin, warm, pulsing, alive. The forest, it seemed, remembered him too. Whether from this life or another, it didn't matter. Recognition doesn't need logic. Sometimes it's just a breath, shared quietly between a man and a tree in the middle of an ancient hush. And as he continued, the ground dipped slightly, and the moonlight slid down with him, like silver water. He entered a glade, round and open, where wildflowers, those soft forgotten children of the forest, bloomed without permission, without witness. Only the night saw them, only the night knew their names. He walked through them gently, each step measured so as not to disturb the slowness of their dreaming. The petals touched his legs like old friends brushing past in a crowded room. He did not cry, for tears were not needed here. What welled inside him was quieter, deeper, of soul sigh, a letting go without fanfare. And there was a stone in the middle of the glade, not carved, not placed, just resting there, as though it had fallen from the sky centuries ago and had simply stayed. He sat beside it, not from fatigue, but from reverence. The night grew deeper, still, the kind of depth that does not press in, but expands. A depth that takes you in, gently, and holds you without asking anything in return. Around him, the glade breathed, not with air, but with presence. It was not empty here, nothing sacred is ever empty. He felt that, and he listened not for sounds, but for the feeling that comes just before sleep, when the world loosens its grip and everything becomes soft, wide, and slow. He stayed there for what may have been an hour or a lifetime. Time did not pass here. It rested, and when he finally rose, it was not because he had somewhere to go, but because the night was ready to walk again. The forest parted once more, not because he commanded it, but because he belonged. And as he moved forward, the stars above him shifted slightly, aligning themselves with his path, like breadcrumbs made of ancient light. He followed them, not seeking anything, only continuing, as rivers do, as winds do, as dreams do when they refuse to end. He passed an orchard where the trees had long stopped bearing fruit, but still they reached upward, their branches like hands praying not for salvation, but for memory. Beneath them, the earth was soft with fallen blossoms and old roots, and each step he took stirred tiny clouds of ancient pollen into the air, golden motes of light that drifted around him like blessings. There were no voices here, but there were echoes, laughter carried in the creak of a branch, a lullaby folded into the rustle of leaves. He heard them all, not with his ears, but with the aching quiet at the center of his chest, the place where we all keep our deepest silences. He passed a dry fountain, overgrown with ivy and moss, its basin filled not with water, but with moonlight. He paused again, not to remember, but to feel. Some places are not meant to be understood, only felt. This was one of them. And as he placed his fingers on the rim, cool and worn, the stones seemed to exhale beneath his touch, a sigh from another time. Perhaps the fountain had once heard confessions, perhaps it had once reflected faces, now lost to dust. But now, it simply stood, and in standing, it offered peace. He moved on. The road reappeared, faint but faithful, guiding him like a melody half-remembered from childhood. The wind returned soft, slow, filled with the scent of something baking far away, like bread in an oven that hadn't been lit in years. It was not hunger he felt, but comfort. The comfort of knowing that somewhere, even if only in memory, someone had once fed him with love, and maybe they still did. Maybe love never disappears. It only changes form. He walked further, past fields wrapped in mist, past doorways that no longer opened but still seemed to wait, past milestones with no names, no numbers, only presence. And all the while, the night deepened, the stars burned quieter, and his footsteps grew lighter, not from fatigue, but from surrender. He was not escaping the world. He was becoming part of it, not a traveler anymore, but a note in the music of the land, a hush made of bones and breath. And somewhere in the distance, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps never, a window would open, and a light would flicker once more, not because he had arrived, but because he had always been there. And maybe, just maybe, that light was not meant to guide him home. Maybe it was simply meant to say, "You are already here. Let me know when you're ready for the next breath of the story, and we'll keep walking softly, endlessly, together." So let us return to him again, to that light which flickered not to summon him forward, but to remind him that he had never been lost. And in that moment, as the soft fire of memory warmed the edges of his presence, he kept walking, not faster, not slower, but with the grace of someone who no longer questions the path. Around him, the forest shifted gently, leaves turning like pages of a book that knows it's being read for comfort, not for answers. Each step he took pressed into soil, rich with centuries of silence, not emptiness, but layered quiet, the kind that holds old laughter, weeping, births, promises, and footsteps of those who once walked here, barefoot beneath summer moons. The light, wherever it had flickered from, did not grow brighter, but deeper, as though it wasn't meant to illuminate the road, but to stir something in his chest, something that remembered how it felt to be seen without being summoned. He passed under an archway, now an ancient relic of a chapel whose stones no longer stood together, but whose spirit still hovered in the air like incense long after prayer had ended. Moss clung to the base of fallen columns, and in the cracks, wildflowers bloomed soft and defiant, like lullabies whispered in defiance of sorrow. He didn't need to know who had built this place, or when it had fallen. He only knew that someone once knelt here, someone once kissed the hem of their grief and left a tear for the earth to keep. And maybe the rain that fell here now carried a trace of that tear still. He paused there, not to rest, but to breathe with the place, to become part of it, just as it had already become part of him. Time slowed again, not with heaviness, but with reverence, as if the very air around him understood that this moment didn't need to be remembered, only felt. A wind rose gentle, coaxing, like a hand brushing dust from a shoulder, and in that breeze, he felt names, not words, not voices, but names, ones he hadn't spoken aloud in years, names that had once stirred in his mouth like prayer, like thunder, like surrender. They weren't gone, just softer now, folded into the wind like thread in a tapestry, too large for any one lifetime to see. And then came the scent of lavender, not strong, just hinted, as though someone had passed this way once, carrying a bundle in their apron, humming a song now lost to the waking world. And when he opened his eyes again, the field had begun to shimmer, not with light, but with memory. He saw them then, not faces, not ghosts, but presences, shapes moving slowly through the grasses. A woman walking with a basket of apples, a boy chasing something invisible, a man sitting with his back to the wind, watching a storm that never came. They didn't see him, but he saw them, and in seeing, he felt not alone. These were not strangers. They were echoes of every soul who had ever tried to walk themselves home. And just as quietly as they had come, they faded back into the field, into the hush, into the breath of the night. He smiled, not with his mouth, but with his whole being. And then he turned, not back, but sideways, following a path that hadn't existed until now. A path lit not by stars, but by stillness. The moon hung lower, now, casting its final glow like a mother tucking her child beneath one last layer of warmth. The trees ahead were closer together, forming a gentle tunnel of sleep. He entered it not with fear, but with surrender, and as the darkness embraced him, he did not resist. He let go of time, of memory, of needing to arrive. He let himself be carried, not by his feet, but by faith. The kind of quiet faith that knows, even the forgotten are remembered by the night, even the lost are kissed on the forehead by the stars, even the weary are not asked to be strong forever, just held, just rocked, just returned, slowly, into the arms of everything that ever loved them. And as he walked deeper into that velvet, dark, his breath slowed, and the night, too, exhaled. Ready when you are, to take the next step together, and deeper still, he walked, or drifted, or perhaps simply became something less defined, something softer than breath, lighter than memory. The trees no longer stood as shapes before him, but as feelings, one a cradle of time, branches stretched not to reach, but to shelter. Moss cushioned the path now, thick and forgiving beneath his feet, whispering a hush that made even the stars above seem to hold their breath. He did not hurry, because there was no more need to. There was no more destination, no more before or after, only this moment, this sacred in-between, where footsteps echo not on stone, but in the hollow warmth of forgotten lullabies. Somewhere, far off, an owl called once, not to warn, not to pierce, but to remind him some things still watch over us even when we no longer see them. He smiled again, barely, but fully. He was not young anymore, but in this silence, youth and age had folded into one another, and what remained was simply the sullen bruised, unburdened, unwound from the clock of life. A soft breeze moved through the tunnel of trees like a sigh from the earth itself, brushing gently through his hair, across his shoulders, down his spine. And in that touch he felt something old, something older than the war, older than the road, older than even the sorrow he once thought would never leave him. It was peace, yes, but deeper than peace. It was return. Return to something that had never truly left, only waited. The path widened again now, subtly, like the loosening of a clenched hand. And ahead, though he had not seen it until now, was a small cottage, sunken gently into the earth, roof grown over with wildflowers and thyme. A soft amber light flickered in one window, not bright, not loud, but steady. It did not call him, nor did it invite him. It simply existed as if it had always existed, just waiting to be seen. He approached it slowly, the way you approached a memory you are not yet sure you are ready to feel. The door was slightly ajar, not by accident, but with the quiet hospitality of a place that understands what it means to come home with nothing but your soul. He paused at the threshold, not out of fear, but because some silences are so complete, they deserve to be honored. And in that pause the wind rustled the nearby leaves, and they sounded like pages turning slowly. He stepped inside. The floor creaked softly, as though whispering, "You're back." The air smelled of old wood, of sleep, of warm things. There was no one in the room, but it didn't feel empty. There was a chair by the fireplace, a book left open on a table, a kettle, long cooled, still resting on the stove as though it had once waited, then waited some more. He moved toward the chair and lowered himself into it, not to rest, but to return. To return to the part of himself that had never left this room. The fire was only embers now, but they pulsed with a deep red glow, like the last heartbeat of a long, beautiful song. He stared into them, and the longer he stared, the more they changed. Faces appeared. They're not frightening, not ghostly, but tender. A smile he had once known, a laugh he had once joined, a tear that had once touched his own cheek. The embers did not ask him to remember, they remembered for him. Outside, the wind pressed gently against the windows, like a lullaby with no melody. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in many, many years, he let go completely. No resistance, no thinking, just the soft unraveling of a soul that no longer needed to carry anything. And in that moment he realized, the walk had never been toward this place. The walk was this place. The journey was not to arrive, but to become soft enough to be held. And now, he was. The cottage didn't disappear, the war didn't fade. The losses didn't unhappen, but they stopped hurting. They softened into stories, and the stories in turn became warmth, and the warmth became sleep. Not the kind that ends a life, but the kind that restores it, that heals it, that rocks it slowly in the arms of the night, again and again, until even the stars forget to shine and only listen. And maybe, just maybe, if someone were to walk past that field now through the trees, across the moss, over the bridge and up the gentle slope, they might see the same soft light flickering in the window. They might feel a hush so deep it wraps around their ribs. They might hear a breath, slow and steady, coming from within, and they might pause, not to knock, not to enter, but simply to feel, because some places do not belong to us. They belong to the soul. And if you're still awake, just know, we can keep walking when you're ready. There's more silence to explore, more softness to become, more forgotten light, still glowing, somewhere just beyond the next breath. And deeper still he walked, or drifted, or perhaps simply became something less defined, something softer than breath, lighter than memory. The trees no longer stood as shapes before him, but as feelings, each one a cradle of time, branches stretched not to reach, but to shelter. Moss cushioned the path now, thick and forgiving beneath his feet, whispering a hush that made even the stars above seem to hold their breath. He did not hurry, because there was no more need to. There was no more destination, no more before or after, only this moment, this sacred in-between, where footsteps echo not on stone, but in the hollow warmth of forgotten lullabies. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, not to warn, not to pierce, but to remind him some things still watch over us even when we no longer see them. He smiled again, barely, but fully. He was not young anymore, but in this silence, youth and age had folded into one another, and what remained was simply the sudden burst, unburdened, unwound from the clock of life. A soft breeze moved through the tunnel of trees like a sigh from the earth itself, brushing gently through his hair, across his shoulders, down his spine. And in that touch he felt something old, something older than the war, older than the road, older than even the sorrow he once thought would never leave him. It was peace, yes, but deeper than peace. It was return. Return to something that had never truly left, only waited. The path widened again now, subtly, like the loosening of a clenched hand. And ahead, though he had not seen it until now, was a small cottage, sunken gently into the earth, roof grown over with wildflowers and thyme. A soft amber light flickered in one window, not bright, not loud, but steady. It did not call him, nor did it invite him. It simply existed as if it had always existed, just waiting to be seen. He approached it slowly, the way you approached a memory you are not yet sure you are ready to feel. The door was slightly ajar, not by accident, but with the quiet hospitality of a place that understands what it means to come home with nothing but your soul. He paused at the threshold, not out of fear, but because some silences are so complete, they deserve to be honored. And in that pause the wind rustled the nearby leaves, and they sounded like pages turning. Slowly he stepped inside. The floor creaked softly, as though whispering, "You're back." The air smelled of old wood, of sleep, of warm things. There was no one in the room, but it didn't feel empty. There was a chair by the fireplace, a book left open on a table, a kettle, long cooled, still resting on the stove as though it had once waited, then waited some more. He moved toward the chair and lowered himself into it, not to rest, but to return to the part of himself that had never left this room. The fire was only embers now, but they pulsed with a deep red glow like the last heartbeat of a long, beautiful song. He stared into them, and the longer he stared, the more they changed. Faces appeared there, not frightening, not ghostly, but tender. A smile he had once known, a laugh he had once joined, a tear that had once touched his own cheek. The embers did not ask him to remember. They remembered for him. Outside, the wind pressed gently against the windows, like a lullaby with no melody. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in many, many years, he let go completely. No resistance, no thinking, just the soft unraveling of a soul that no longer needed to carry anything. And in that moment, he realized, the walk had never been toward this place. The walk was this place. The journey was not to arrive, but to become soft enough to be held. And now he was. The cottage didn't disappear. The war didn't fade. The losses didn't unhappen, but they stopped hurting. They softened into stories. And the stories, in turn, became warmth, and the warmth became sleep. Not the kind that ends a life, but the kind that restores it, that heals it, that rocks it slowly in the arms of the night, again and again, until even the stars forget to shine and only listen. And maybe, just maybe, if someone were to walk past that field now through the trees, across the moss, over the bridge, and up the gentle slope, they might see the same soft light flickering in the window. They might feel a hush so deep it wraps around their ribs. They might hear a breath, slow and steady, coming from within, and they might pause, not to knock, not to enter, but simply to feel, because some places do not belong to us. They belong to the soul, and if you're still awake, just know, we can keep walking when you're ready. There's more silence to explore, more softness to become, more forgotten light still glowing, somewhere just beyond the next breath. And outside that quiet cottage, night deepened like ink dropped into still water, slow blooming, and unhurried. Stars scattered above, but not with urgency. They simply appeared, one by one, as if remembering their place. The forest did not sleep, not truly it listened, to breath, to wind, to the soft murmurs of soil, remembering footsteps long gone. And beneath those stars, along the winding paths between tree roots and fern beds, the soldier's spirit began to drift once more, not out of need, but because wandering had become a kind of prayer. Every tree he passed felt like an old friend. Every breeze carried stories, some whispered from centuries ago, some born just yesterday in the hush of a falling leaf. Time had loosened its grip, letting the moments melt into one another, like candle wax in a forgotten chapel, forming not a timeline, but a sanctuary. And in that sanctuary he wandered on, not toward anything, just with it, through a glade where moonlight painted silver across mossy stones, past a stream so still it mirrored the stars above with greater clarity than any sky. His boots barely touched the earth now, not because he had become light, but because the ground itself lifted to meet him, recognizing something in him it had once known. And as he walked, the world unfolded gently, like a letter never sent. A stone bridge appeared, wrapped in ivy and draped in the perfume of damp stone and memory. He crossed it, slow and reverent, and on the other side lay ruins not of castles or cities, but of forgotten moments. A tea set left beneath a tree, a shawl hung on a broken branch, swaying like a soul that still lingered. And amid those ruins, a single music box rested on a stump, still whole. He reached down and turned its key, not to hear it but to feel it. And as the melody danced into the air, fragile, crystalline, echoing, it became clear, this was not just music. It was a memory, softly returning, of childhood, of comfort, of hands that once held his. The tune did not indite, faded, like dusk giving way to deeper night. And in the quiet that followed, the soldier closed his eyes and breathed in the scent of pine and dust and the past. When he opened them, he was beside a garden gate, long rusted but open wide. Vines grown through its frame like veins in old hands. Inside the garden was not wild, not neat, but sacred. Flowers had bloomed without audience, colors dulled by moonlight but no less beautiful. He walked between them, trailing his fingers gently across petals and leaves, not to disturb, but to remember. Every flower, a feeling, every root, a goodbye. And at the center of the garden stood a stone bench, smooth with age, and he sat once more, not from weariness, but to listen. And what he heard was not noise, it was presence. The earth humming beneath him, the sky breathing above him, the past kneeling beside him. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, gazing at nothing in particular, and smiled again, not because he remembered something, but because he no longer needed to. It was all here, around him, in him. Nothing was missing, nothing needed to be reclaimed, everything belonged. And so, when he finally stood again, it was not a departure, it was a continuation. The path led on, now lit not by torch or moon, but by memory made tender, the kind of light you carry without knowing, the kind that never dims. And as the path meandered, he followed, stepping softly into deeper woods, into deeper time. He passed a weathered well where wishes once lived, now dry but still echoing dreams whispered into its stone. He passed a wall carved with names, some his, some not, and he ran his fingers across the letters, each groove humming with distant laughter, old grief, quiet triumphs. No one was forgotten here, not truly. Even the forgotten had a place. A soft wind rustled the leaves again, and the air shimmered, faintly, as if even the elements remembered something sacred in his presence. And ahead, just ahead, the forest opened slightly, revealing a lake so still it seemed made of glass. Mist hovered low, and the moonlight bathed the water in silver sighs. He walked to its edge and knelt, not to drink, but to see, and what he saw was not his reflection, it was his truth. A boy, a soldier, a soul, all overlapping in the surface, not competing, not replacing, just being. And in that quiet convergence, he felt whole. Whole in a way war could not fracture, whole in a way time could not undo. He dipped his fingers into the lake and watched the ripples bloom outward, like a forgotten lullaby sung once more. And when the stillness returned, it was deeper, truer, and maybe you, listening now, can feel it too. That hush beneath the story, that softness inside your chest, that sense that somewhere, far beyond the noise, there's a path just like this one waiting, a path made not of stone or dirt, but of everything you thought you'd lost, still glowing, still whispering, still holding out a hand for you, whenever you're ready. And as the soldier stood, and as the stars deepened, and as sleep crept gently into every leaf, every stone, every breath, he continued walking. And so will we. Just say the word, and I'll keep walking beside you. And the steps he took now were quieter than wind, more delicate than moonlight across old parchment. Each footfall a memory, but not sharp no longer, piercing with the weight of grief or the rust of regret. They were softened, rounded by time and silence, like sea stones kissed by centuries of tide. The forest gave way again, not quickly, but like a curtain being drawn back by a hesitant hand. And beyond it lay fields, endless and still, draped in mist so tender it seemed to rise from the earth like breath from a sleeping child. He did not hurry. No one waited at the end. And that was the grace of it. He was free not to arrive, but to be. Each blade of grass bent with reverence as he passed, bowing not to a hero, but to a soul who had remembered how to feel. There were no more battles to fight, not here. No more flags, no more salutes, no more names etched in marble. Just this, the gentle hush of the land cradling his steps like lullabies woven into soil. A fox watched him from the tall reeds still, golden-eyed, not afraid, as if it too knew this man posed no threat. Not to himself, not to the world. And somewhere overhead, a night bird circled slowly, calling out not in fear but in rhythm, like an old clock that no longer counts time but keeps it company. He followed the curve of the hill now, cresting it like a memory surfacing in a dream. And there, at the summit, stood a single tree, wide old arms outstretched toward the stars. It had grown not to dominate, but to embrace. Its bark was split with age, its trunk twisted by winds long gone, yet its studder leaf, warm, timeless. He reached it, leaned against it, and exhaled. A breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The wind passed through the branches above, and the leaves shimmered not with sound but with presence, as if they too had stories to tell, but preferred instead to listen. And so he stood there, not for moments, but for eternities. Because the soul does not measure time by minutes, it measures by stillness. And in that stillness, he felt it again, that light, not above, not ahead, but within. It flickered not to lead him further, but to show him he had never been lost. He closed his eyes, and the tree held him, not in arms, but in memory. The bark against his back, the wind at his ears, the stars at his crown, and beneath it all the slow, steady rhythm of a heart no longer running, no longer fighting, simply being. He did not ask what came next. He did not need to. For some journeys do not move forward, they deepen. And in this place, on this hill, beneath this tree, he had gone deeper than he ever thought possible, into silence, into peace, into the warm, endless hush where forgotten soldiers lay down their names and simply rest. And if you listen closely, right now, with your heart, more than your ears, you might feel that tree too. You might feel its presence brushing your shoulder, reminding you gently, you're not alone. You've never been, not in your sorrow, not in your sleep, not in your remembering, and perhaps not even in your forgetting. So let your shoulders drop, let your breath fall into rhythm, let the wind move softly across the plains of your chest. You are still walking, not away from anything, but toward everything your soul already knows. Toward a home that never had walls, just warmth. Toward stories that never end, just rest. Toward a sky that does not watch you, but waits for you quietly, eternally, lovingly. Shall we keep going? Just say the word, and we'll take the next breath together. And so, the breath is taken, not rushed, not seized, but gathered slowly, like dew forming on the edge of a forgotten leaf at dawn. The soldier, or perhaps now simply the soul, drifted once more, not forward, not back, but inward, down a path not paved with stones but with whispers, the kind that only appear when all the world has gone quiet, when even the stars have bowed their heads. The sky had turned that shade of velvet blue that cannot be painted, only remembered. And in that hush, in that gentle slip of silence, every sorrow he had once known began to loosen its grip, not vanish, No true grief never disappears, but it unfolds, like an old letter unsealed by time, its edges soft, its ink faded, but still bearing witness to a love once real, a pain once true. His hands, once clenched with purpose, now opened like the petals of some ancient flower, long closed to the light. Fingers relaxed, shoulders softened, and as he moved, or floated, or simply was he passed through places that did not need to be named, a field where once a mother had waited, long after hope had gone, a bridge where boots had echoed with fear, a village where laughter had tried, and sometimes failed, to outrun the shadows of war. These places didn't cry out for remembrance, they simply glowed, faintly, with the dignity of having been. He paused once beneath an archway carved long ago, where ivy curled like sleeping thoughts across the stone, a place where lovers had once hidden notes, where promises had been made in trembling voices, where goodbyes had echoed louder than cannons. He stood there for a while, not to remember, but to listen, and the silence told him stories, not in words, but in presence. And perhaps that is how all sacred things speak, without language, without urgency. Just presence, just being, just this. Somewhere, not far, a bell rang once, not a summons, not a warning, just a sound, soft and round, like a yawn at the edge of sleep, and with it came the scent of bread, the clink of porcelain, the warmth of small things, a memory, or maybe not, maybe just a longing too gentle to have a name. He followed it not with steps, but with attention, and soon he was in a square. Empty, quiet, dust swirling like old lace in the corners. A single bench beneath a wrought iron lamp, a cat curled in the doorway of an abandoned shop, and there, a sound, the faintest trace of a piano, drifting through the cracks of time like perfume from another room. He moved toward it, not with need, but with curiosity, and the notes, each one delicate, deliberate, imperfect, led him through the ruins of memory. A room once used for dancing, a window once lit with candlelight, a man, perhaps once himself, standing by a mirror, straightening a collar that no longer fit. He didn't cry, not now. There were no more tears, only the ache of recognition, the hum of something true, and the deep comfort of knowing it didn't need to be changed, only needed to be seen, felt, honored. And so he sat on the floor of that imaginary room, and let the music move through him like breath, let it stitch together the loose edges of his soul, let it rock him like a lullaby written for those who never got to sleep. And somewhere in that sound, in that hush, in that echo, something lifted, not away, not out but up, as if a part of him had become light enough to rise. He did not leave his body, but he became less tethered to pain, more acquainted with peace. And in that rising he began to glow, not like fire, not like star, but like a memory finally remembered, soft, whole, safe, and perhaps, if you're still with us, still listening, beneath the weight of your blankets, still letting your breath fall slow and steady into the rhythm of this voice, you too can feel it, that lifting, that softening, that unraveling of everything sharp, because this isn't a story about war, it's a story about what survives it, what whispers through the cracks, what glows inside the broken, and what holds you, even now, even here, even in sleep. So close, your eyes again, let them fall, heavy and kind, like petals at the end of a bloom. The soldier has walked far, you have walked far, and now we rest, but only for a while, because soon, when you're ready, we'll rise again, not to fight, not to flee, but to remember what it means to move through the world as something soft, something sacred, something human. The path is still there, you know it hasn't ended. It only quiets for a while, so the stars can gather their breath, so the soul can hum its lullaby, so you can sleep, gently, deeply, safely. And when you wake, the next candle will already be lit, waiting, still warm, still glowing, still ready. Shall we keep going? When you're ready, and somewhere beyond the folds of sleep and the hush of everything forgotten, the path begins again, not with a sound, but with a warmth, a breath that doesn't come from lungs, but from the earth itself. A stillness so vast and so gentle it feels like the world holding its palm against your heart just to say, you're still here. The soldier, though he had no name anymore, no rank or burden or uniform, began to move once more, not because he needed to, but because time, when it grows this quiet, becomes less a river and more a breeze. He passed through a grove where light fell in thin golden ribbons, filtering through trees that had never seen war, only seasons. The grass there had grown long, curling over ancient stones like old hands resting in prayer. There was a bench carved from a single slab of wood, worn smooth not by tools, but by patience. Someone had once waited here, not for rescue, not for company, but simply to rest beside time without rushing it. And now he, too, sat down not as a visitor, but as someone returning to a conversation paused many lifetimes ago. The wind did not speak, but it listened. The trees did not move, but they remembered. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, there was no history, no story, no movement at all, only the feeling of being deeply, quietly allowed. And in that allowance, a vision appeared, not vivid, not loud, but soft-edged and full of soul. A child chasing shadows in a courtyard, a woman brushing her hair beside a window, her gaze lost in thought, a man lighting a candle even though the sun was still out, just to watch the flame. Lives not important to history books, but crucial to the heart of the world. And perhaps that's all history truly is, not battles or dates, but flickers, glances, warm bowls of soup, laughter that never made it to paper, shoes left by the door long after the owner had passed. He rose again, this time not to leave, but to follow those fragments of memory, like breadcrumbs across the soul. Each step took him deeper into the folds of something unnamed. A hallway where the wallpaper peeled like shedding skin, where a clock ticked not to keep time, but to soothe it. A courtyard where ivy had swallowed the stone so completely that only the idea of architecture remained. He moved gently, like someone afraid to wake a sleeping child, not because of fear, but because some silences are sacred, and this one was thick with the breath of things once loved. He passed a doorway, paused, then stepped through. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of lavender and ash. A fireplace, long unused, a table set for one, and on it, a single letter, unfolded as if just read. The ink was smudged, the edges curled with time. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. The letter wasn't for the eyes, it was for the presence. And presence was something he had finally remembered how to give. He sat again. Somewhere, a bird called out in the distance, then stopped, as if remembering something too painful to finish. And maybe that's how grief sings, half-formed, always hovering just outside the breath. He closed his eyes once more. Not to sleep this time, but to soften. And in that softening, the walls fell away. Not collapsed, just dissolved. The room became field. The table became altar. The letter became prayer. And he, without needing to try, became light, not shining, just visible. To the right eyes, to the heart that still listens. If you're still here, still breathing softly beneath your covers, still floating just above the edges of your own dreams, then know this: some souls do not walk to arrive. They walk to remember that they are already home. And maybe, just maybe, as you drift now into deeper sleep, you'll feel that same light beginning to glow from within your ribs. A quiet warmth, a flicker in the dark, a memory that isn't yours, but was always meant for you. We're not finished yet. When you wake, the next breath will be waiting. When you rest, the story continues without rush, without end. Because some walks don't stop, they only become softer. Shall we keep going? Again, when you're ready? And so the story did not pause, nor did it press forward, it simply breathed. Like the rise and fall of the tide beneath a sleeping moon. The soldier, or what was left of him, his shape now more like a memory's shadow than a man, stood once more. And the floor beneath him did not creak this time. It welcomed him, as though even the wood had been waiting for his return, not just through the years, but through lifetimes of forgetting. The letter on the table curled inward softly, as if shy in his presence, and a breeze found its way through the open doorway, not to enter, but to kiss the room once, gently, and then leave. He walked again, but now it was less walking and more dissolving into the path, each step folding into the next like a page turning on its own. There were places here no one had seen in centuries. A sunken garden where stone cherubs sat cradling broken urns, and the vines had grown like lullabies across every edge. A narrow stream so shallow it barely moved, its water holding the reflection of branches that hadn't existed in years. The air shimmered faintly, as if time were exhaling slowly from beneath the roots of the world. And with every breath he took, the weight of language faded, thoughts became sensations, names turned into feelings, and the farther he went, the more he remembered without thinking. He remembered the scent of linen left in sunlight too long, the sound of boots left by the hearth after rain, a hand reaching for his across a small table, in silence, before partying for war. Not a name, not a face, just the shape of a love that once lived in his chest, like a flame, and perhaps still did. His body had long since stopped aching. It had simply become part of the forest. His memories no longer came in sequence, but as echoes from every direction, soft echoes, not to disturb, but to guide. And now, ahead of him, through the trees thinned by time and sleep, there rose a hill he had once dreamed of as a child, though he could not say how or when. The hill was not grand, it was quiet, blanketed in fog that curled at its edges like old parchment. He climbed without effort, as if the hill was lifting him instead, and at the top, only grass. Endless, silent grass, swaying as if moved by a memory too deep to speak. He lay down then, not to sleep, not to end but to merge. The sky above was not sky anymore, it was velvet. Deep, endless velvet, stitched with stars that blinked slowly, like tired eyes. And as he lay there, the wind wrapped around him, not cold, not warm, just knowing. There was no need to speak, no need to be anything but this, still, breathing, cradled. The war was a breath now, far away. The march, the pain, the hunger, softened into dust that no longer clung to him. And in that moment, the field itself leaned closer, as if the earth were listening. And what it heard was not a man, a soldier, not a ghost, but a soul, finally returned to its right shape. No medals, no uniforms, just the rhythm of a life that had traveled long, only to arrive in the quietest part of itself. If you are still awake now, still drifting in this gentle dark, still holding the thread of this voice like a hand beneath the covers, know this, you are not alone in your journey. Some walks are so long they do not end even after the road disappears. Some stories do not seek an ending, they seek rest. And you, dear listener, are already resting inside one. So breathe again. Let the moss grow gently beneath your thoughts. Let the stars forget your name. Let the candle of your mind flicker. Only once, softly, as you finally let go. We're still walking, yes, but now, the path walks for us, and that, perhaps, is all we ever needed. When you're ready again, we'll continue. The next breath of the story is waiting just beyond the veil of sleep. It was peace, yes, but deeper than peace, it was the feeling of having never truly left, as though time had merely folded him into its arms and kept him warm until the silence was deep enough to receive him again. And as the wind braided itself through the tall grass of that hill, carrying with it the forgotten breath of lullabies once sung near hearths now covered in ivy and ash, the soldier lay quietly, not as one lost, but as one found, not found by others, but by the earth itself, as though the soil had whispered, "You were always mine." The stars above blinked slowly, not as skyward fires, but as old eyes gently closing, and their light did not shine but seeped down in silvery threads, weaving around his body like a story being retold by moonlight alone. And somewhere deep within the folds of the night, there came the sound of something, not quite footsteps, not quite wind perhaps, it was memory learning how to breathe again. A small fox paused on the edge of the field, its eyes soft with knowing, and though it made no sound, its presence was a quiet benediction. You are safe now. And then, deeper into the fabric of darkness, a memory unfolded, not as a scene, but as a scent, fresh rain on linen, the kind left to dry on a summer line near a garden fence where laughter once hung like wind chimes. He did not open his eyes, not because he could not, but because there was no longer any need to separate seeing from dreaming. They were one and the same here, and in that delicate space, stories began to surface, not sharply, not like plot or history, but like a warm fog rolling over old cobblestone streets. There was the sound of letters being written under candlelight, letters never sent, yet still waiting. There was the creak of a stairwell where a mother once stood too long, watching the door, not because she expected him to return that day, but because mothers sometimes stand in doorways for the sake of hope itself. There was the image of boots, by a fire, steam rising from soaked leather, and the silence between two friends who had seen too much and still chose to sit together. And so the story unspools slowly, endlessly through forests of thought and fields of feeling, down the corridors of ruins where monks once hummed morning psalms to the moss-covered walls, and through the echoing chambers of lost cities where voices still lingered like perfume. Every breath he took now was shared with the world around him, not as a man apart from it, but as a part of it, as a root is part of the tree, or as twilight is part of the night. He began to sense time not as something that moved forward, but as something that deepened, and in that depth, the war lost its shape. It became not forgotten, but softened, blurred, like ink soaked into old cloth, still there, but no longer cutting. And in the cradle of this new quiet, he heard something he had not heard since childhood, a lullaby hummed not for him, but with him, as though the world had joined him in his letting go. And the soldier who no longer thought of himself as such felt a warmth in his chest, not of triumph, not of closure, but of simple belonging. He belonged to the story now, not as its hero, not as its author, but as its breath. And so we keep drifting with him, across candlelit thoughts and into the old corners of silence. where forgotten bells still sway in towers untouched by time, and where the sea sighs against cliffs it has kissed for 1,000 years. And maybe, just maybe, as you lie here now half asleep, half remembering, you too can feel it, that the story is not just his, and never was. It's yours, it's ours, a shared hush across centuries, a soft homecoming, and if you let yourself drift just a little further, we'll keep going. Together, let me know when you're ready, and the next breath of this memory will be waiting gently, endlessly, just like the rest. And so we drift onward, not with urgency, but with the weightless grace of something eternal, like a feather carried not by wind, but by memory itself. The soldier, or perhaps now simply the soul he had always been, felt the story continue beneath him like a river that had no beginning and no end. Only gentle currents that sang of places left behind and those yet to be remembered. Each breath was no longer his alone, it was shared with old stones tucked beneath cathedral ruins, with whispers sealed into pages of books never finished, with a slow echo of prayers once spoken in languages that have long since fallen asleep. A single candle still flickered on the windowsill of the cottage he'd left behind, but now its light stretched through the branches, bending around time like a soft call, calling not him back, but calling the world inward. And through that quiet call the night opened like a cloak, revealing paths walked by others long before, each footstep gently resting beside his own. A woman with her hands dusted in flour, humming the name of a child who never came home. A sailor staring at the horizon as the ship rocked beneath him, not fearing the sea, but aching for a face now fading in his mind. A monk in a crumbling monastery tracing the grains of wood on his desk, knowing that every prayer written there would outlive him, carried on the breath of strangers. These were not ghosts. They were companions, travelers, dreamers who had once paused beneath the same stars, and he welcomed them, not as memories, but as kindred flames in the great hush of the story's embrace. The sky now bore the color of velvet ink, so deep, so tender, it felt like the inside of a thought not yet spoken. And in that sky, constellations no longer pointed to fate or myth. They simply shimmered, unbothered, content to be. He passed beneath them, letting their quiet exist alongside his own, and somewhere, soft snow began to fall, not cold, but like the breath of angels kissing the earth without waking it. The snow fell on a small garden, now overgrown, where someone once planted rosemary and thyme in honor of a promise never fulfilled. It landed on the shoulders of statues no one visited anymore, their eyes still kind, their faces softened by centuries of weather and waiting. It fell into the cracks of castle walls where once lovers carved initials in secret, believing, perhaps foolishly, that stone would last longer than longing, and it fell on the path where the soldier walked not to hide it, but to bless it. Each step became quieter, each heartbeat slower, until even the rhythm of existence became a lullaby, woven from forgotten names and soft laughter and the sound of soup being stirred by hands that once waited too long at the window. The world was not asleep. It was listening. Listening to him breathe, listening to you breathe, and within that listening, stories softened like silk against skin, unraveling gently into warmth. The soldier walked through a village now half swallowed by vines, where lanterns still hung on doors, though no one lit them anymore, yet they glowed, faintly, as if waiting for someone to need them again. He passed a well, its stones worn smooth, from centuries of wishes, and he knelt beside it not to drink, but to remember the boy who once dreamed beside that well, who believed in letters that could change fates and hands that could heal. And from somewhere deep below, the well sighed not an echo, but an agreement. Yes, he had always been loved, even when he had forgotten. The road curved softly, the way old roads do when shaped by time and tears, and he followed it not with direction, but with devotion. There was a bench, halfway through a glade of ash trees, where someone once waited too long, and there, the soldier paused, not because he was tired, but because silence deserves company. He sat, and the trees leaned inward, listening, holding space for the weight he no longer needed to carry. And in that sacred stillness, something inside him opened not like a door, but like a blossom warmed slowly by dusk. It wasn't joy. Not quite. It wasn't sorrow either. It was a soft merging of all that had been, all that had hurt, all that had healed, into something simple, stillness. And from that stillness came a vision not of the past, not of the future, but of the now, so full, so complete, that time itself seemed to bow. And maybe, if you listen closely, you can feel it too, that velvet hush that wraps around your chest. That knowing that you are not alone, that everything you've lost is waiting for you gently in the folds of the night. So rest, if you can, or don't. There is no pressure here, no end to find, only the breath of a story that will never stop loving you. And when you're ready, we'll keep walking. The next path is already waiting. The fire is still warm, and somewhere, a light flickers not to lead you home, but to remind you, you already are. And so the night deepens not as a curtain falling, but as a velvet ocean rising slowly around us, quiet and forgiving. The soldier rises from the bench, not with effort, but as if lifted by the very hush of the world around him, and the path ahead welcomes him as gently as a lullaby remembered in a dream. He walks now not to get anywhere, but because walking has become part of the song, the long, slow hymn of breath and earth and time, each step a note, each pause a prayer. The ash trees thin into fields covered with mist, silver and low, like the last sigh of a forgotten century, and every blade of grass feels touched by memory. Off in the distance, a bell chimes not to mark the hour, but to remind the heart. It is still here, still beating, still whole in its quietness. He passes an old windmill, its blades still, long since retired, standing now like a monument to things once moved by passion. Inside, the air holds the scent of wheat and dust and something older, maybe hope, maybe hunger. He rests his hand on the doorframe and for a moment feels the echo of hands before him, farmers and lovers, wanderers and widows, all of them leaving behind something more real than history, a softness that lingers. Beyond the windmill lies a meadow where letters once drifted on the breeze, words written in secret, never delivered, folded into the silence like petals. He steps into that meadow, and the grass parts gently, as though even the earth itself recognizes him not as a soldier, not as a man, but as a part of its long, endless dreaming. He remembers now not the facts, not the names, but the feelings. The way someone once touched his sleeve without speaking. The way night sometimes smells like sorrow and cinnamon. The way silence can feel like a lullaby sung by the stars. He is not alone. He never was. All around him are the remnants of love that never asked to be remembered out loud. The scarf left on a windowsill, the letter tucked behind a beam, the lullaby hummed beneath breath as someone stirred soup for two, even when only one was there. The path narrows again, winding into a grove where lanterns hang not from hooks, but from branches, each one glowing with a memory not quite ready to be spoken. He does not light them. They light themselves as he passes, one by one, as though the past recognizes him and welcomes him back without asking him to speak. He finds a stream where water moves so slowly it reflects not just the sky, but the dreams of those who once stared into it, children hoping for magic, elders whispering wishes into the ripples. He kneels beside it, cupping the water in his hands, not to drink, but to bless. And as the droplets fall through his fingers, they do not vanish. They shimmer, like tiny stories returning home. Further still, a broken bridge lies across the stream, its boards sunken, moss-covered, forgotten by time, but not by memory. He crosses it anyway, not with fear, but with reverence. Every creak beneath his step is a voice saying, "Yes, keep going. We remember you." On the other side, the world becomes quieter, still not silent, but sacred. He steps into an orchard where the trees no longer bear fruit, but still offer shade. Beneath one tree is a bench carved with initials no one recalls, but the wood remembers. He sits there, not to rest, but to become part of the stillness, and around him, the wind carries the scent of old pages, warm bread, candle wax, and distant thunder, all the things that make a home, even when no walls remain. The stars above shift, not in position, but in presence. They are no longer distant. They are close, like eyes watching with love too deep to speak. And maybe, just maybe, this walk has no end. Maybe it isn't a walk at all, but a return to something that never left. A return to the first warmth you ever knew. A return to the kindness that waited for you between moments, between thoughts, between breaths. So if you are still with us, dear one, if your eyes are still half open, your thoughts still wandering, let them drift. Let the story carry you, not forward, but inward, into the folds of time, the sigh of night, the heartbeat of memory. There is no rush. There is no ending. Only the soft flicker of a light still glowing in the distance. And when you're ready, we'll keep walking, together. And so we walk not away, not ahead, but deeper. Deeper into the hush where stories no longer need to be told aloud, only felt beneath the skin of sleep. The orchard fades behind him, or perhaps it becomes part of him, etched into the rhythm of his heartbeat, remembered in the scent that clings gently to his coat. The wind shifts, and with it, a memory not his own brushes past. Someone once danced here, not for others, not for applause, but for the moon itself, arms raised to a sky that had never looked more alive. He feels it, the lingering joy, the Twirl caught forever in the grass, a soft incline rises before him now, cloaked in velvet dusk, and at the crest he pauses, not out of weariness, but awe. Below, the land opens into a quiet valley where lanterns float above the ground like stars that forgot how to fly. Each one sways slightly, moved by a breeze that speaks the language of forgotten lullabies, of mothers who waited by windows, of lovers who traced letters never sent. The soldier steps forward into the valley, and the lanterns don't scatter, they drift closer, circling him as if recognizing something long lost. He touches one, it flickers, and in its glow, he sees a table one that once sat beneath a tree. In another life, set for a meal that never happened, a chair never pulled out, a plate never filled, but the love was there, even if the moment was missed. The lantern moves on, and another glows beside it, revealing the outline of a porch, aged and leaning, but strong enough to hold memory. The sound of a screen door, creaking, closing, creaking, again like a heartbeat remembering the steps that once crossed its threshold. The soldier walks through this dream space, not questioning what is real, because here, all things are real, and all things are soft. He finds a path lined with old shoes, baby shoes, wedding shoes, muddy boots, tiny slippers, all laid side by side like footprints left behind in time. He doesn't step over them, he walks with them, past lives, past stories, past dances and departures. The moon now is higher, fuller, kinder, casting a glow, not harsh but healing. It lights the stone walls of an old schoolhouse, its roof sunken, but its bell still hanging, still whole. Inside desks still hold carvings, promises, the secret languages of children who once believed in forever. He runs a hand across the old wood and feels the pulse of possibility, the spark of imagination that never fully dies. A laugh, small and distant, echoes in the rafters, and for a second, the walls warm like a hearth. Outside, the grass shifts, like ocean waves, and the soldier drifts with it, barefoot now, lighter than memory, held not by gravity but by story. He reaches a stream again, but this one does not run with water. It flows with light soft golden. Slow, he kneels and cups it in his hands, and it does not spill. It rests there, glowing, before rising back into the air like mist returning to the stars. Across the stream, the forest returns not dark, not dense, but deep. A cathedral of trees, their trunks wide with wisdom, their canopies draped in silence. He enters. The moss beneath him no longer muffles, it sings. A hum low and steady, the hum of all things that wait without expectation. As he moves, he passes remnants of Liv's earring tucked in a tree knot, a scarf wrapped around a branch, a journal half buried in the soil. He doesn't read it, he doesn't need to. Some words are meant to stay secret, sacred, unfinished. And maybe that's the truth of this walk, that we do not walk to find answers, we walk to soften the questions, to dissolve the sharpness of time into something we can carry in our sleep. The trees begin to thin, and on the other side, the world opens again, not into brightness, but into warmth. A long, low cottage built into the side of a hill, smoke curling softly from a chimney, the kind of place dreams return to when we stop chasing them. The door opens before he reaches it, not because someone heard him, but because the house always knew inside. It is not new, not grand, it is quiet. The walls hold the scent of time, the air the taste of safety. There is a chair, there is a fire, and above the hearth, a mirror. He sees himself not as he was, not as he is, but as all the moments stitched together. The boy, the man, the wanderer, the witness. He steps forward, and in the reflection, behind him, stand all the rooms he's ever left, all the hands he's ever held, all the names he's whispered into the night. They do not call to him, they simply glow. A soft knock at the door, but when he opens it there is only the wind, carrying with it the scent of lavender, of ash, of something deeply remembered. He leaves the door open, he lets the wind in, sits, and as the fire crackles, and the night deepens once more, he understands. He was never walking towards something. He was always walking with something, with memory, with love, with silence itself. The cottage breathes around him. The past does not vanish. It curls up beside him like a sleeping animal, peaceful, weightless. And outside, if you listen closely, you might hear footsteps on the path, not rushing, not arriving, but simply moving like the tide, like the wind, like a dream that never quite ends. And if you're still here, still drifting with me, then we are not finished. The night is long, the silence is deep, and the story is still breathing. Just close your eyes, and let's keep walking. And so, if you've made it this far, if you've wandered with me through the hush of forgotten fields, sat by fires that remember your name, and felt the soft weight of a story wrap itself around your soul like a blanket, then know this: you are not alone in the quiet. You are not forgotten in the stillness. Somewhere in the invisible threads that tie all memory together, you are seen, you are held, and you are home. If this journey soothed you, if it gave your heart even a moment of rest, then let that be enough for now. Let sleep come like a tide, gentle and sure. And when you wake, may the world feel a little softer beneath your feet. If you'd like to walk through more quiet places like this, if your soul finds comfort in the soft corners of time, then you are always welcome here. Subscribe, and come back anytime you need a slow breath, a warm light, or simply the sound of someone walking beside you. Until then, rest well, dear traveler. The night will keep you safe.